So this, and y'all have done this at least twice in classes. So this goes back to the whole idea of how do we get overhead into the cost of the product, right? We at first used just a single one for the whole plant-wide predetermined overhead rate, where we took every budgeted overhead cost in the whole thing and divided by every budgeted labor hour or machine hour or labor dollar or whatever. So activity-based costing, this is under some circumstances, which is where a lot of your conceptual questions come into play. What circumstances is this better? But under some circumstances, it would be better for us to develop more overhead rates based on taking pools of overhead costs and saying, well, here's a pool of costs that results from this driver. Here's a pool that results from this driver. You know, the number of setups of the machines, you know, the more setups that product A has to do, it incurs more of this cost, right? So you're going to have multiple cost pools, multiple different cost drivers, and ultimately a whole bunch of different overhead rates based on a whole bunch of different drivers. It's not hard to do at all. You're just doing the predetermined overhead rate a bunch of different times, using a bunch of different, you know, divisions of the overhead numbers, right? So it should result in more accurate product costing. And the case where it would work is essentially when you got something like a basic and a deluxe. You know, you got a basic product and a deluxe product. Products that use different quantities of the different drivers. You know, the deluxe product may require materials handling way more than the basic one because there's not as much materials to handle. So whatever overhead cost pool that results from materials handling gets bunched up into a pool divided by maybe the number of material components. And there's a rate for that. So basic and deluxe products is the easiest way I can kind of simplify that to say that's when activity-based costing tends to work the best. The prep software books always like to do this unit level, batch level mess. I stuck it in there for you to look at. It wouldn't show up in a test in here, but just because they always throw those in, I thought, well, it's easy enough, so maybe we'd overlook it. So I'll leave that for you. And then they talk about activity-based management, which kind of goes hand in hand with the activity-based costing. You know, you're doing all this analysis of cost drivers, cause and effect, and you're really getting a whole lot more new information, right? And with that new understanding comes a better understanding of, hey, well, that's not really a value-added activity there. You know, all that materials handling. Let's try to cut some of that and so eliminate waste. Activity-based management, the term that could show up, I guess. But activity-based costing itself, quite easy. So we've got a company here, and it has a basic and a deluxe. It's got a mirror for the wall, and then it's got specialty windows. You know? So those different product lines use different levels of, in this case, there's a whole lot more materials that have to be moved for the specialty windows versus the mirrors. So if we want more accurate product costing, we need to kind of develop that cause and effect relationship and see what kind of overhead dollars result from that activity and assign overhead based on that. So number one says under a costing system that assigns overhead on the basis of just direct labor hours, what is the materials handling cost allocated of the wall mirror? And then number two is going to shift us into activity-based costing, and it's going to say what's the materials handling cost assigned to one unit of the wall mirror. All right, so traditional system, one overhead pool, one driver, one rate, right? So we got a total amount of overhead right there. Well, they just give us materials handling, but whatever. $50,000 divided by 400 total direct labor hours. Our rate is 125 for direct labor hours. All right. Well, there's 200 direct labor hours being used. So 25,000. If you get an eyeball this and seeing 200 here, 200 here, half goes to one, half goes to the other, right? And it says 1 unit, so here are 25 units. So, $1,000. All right. Now, part 2 is going to make the point. They're not making us do multiple rates with this one. That's this one. But part 2 is making the point. This is not the best cost driver for materials handling cost. Direct labor hours isn't really capturing a cause and effect relationship here, right? Wouldn't it be better to allocate that to the two product lines based on how many material moves are needed per product line? So activity-based costing would have us develop that cause and effect relationship and say that $50,000 material handling cost needs to be dealt with based on material moves. We're still getting the total. Always get your rate by taking the total budgeted numbers, not piece by piece, right? That's 50,000. 20, 2,500 per move. All right. This mirrors what we're allocating costs to. Actual moves for it, 5 of them. So that product line gets 12,500 of that. And there are 25 units. So 500 per unit.
What is the first one? 500?
The first,
Number one.
not based on direct labor hours. Yeah. On direct labor hours, each product line uses the same amount. So you're basically just taking that overhead number and splitting it in half. But the point of this is direct labor hours really doesn't cause that materials handling cost to go up as much as the number of moves of material that have to happen. So it would be better to allocate that materials handling cost based on material moves instead of labor hours, especially since the basic line and the deluxe line here uses different levels of that activity. That's the point with these two questions about why activity-based costing is important.
Same amount of labor went into it.
same amount of labor did.
But not
And whatever overhead costs are driven by labor hours would be kind of split in half in those two. But the point with activity based is somebody identified this cost pool dealing with materials handling. So let's use a different driver for that and allocate that 50,000 of whatever the total is based on materials moves. There are more overhead costs that are unknown in this problem that have something to do with other things. You know, there might be setup costs. So those would be driven by how many setups are required to do this product line, how many setups for the other, and develop a whole bunch of different rates with a whole bunch of different drivers. Now, a better question here, and it's a bigger one, but it's easy. We got a company here that had a whole bunch of overhead costs, you know. This is all their overhead costs, but somebody analyzed the total overhead costs and said, well, looks like about 20,000 of that's because we have to set up machines. About 130 of it's because of inspections. You know, these are things we can't directly trace to a product, but we have to allocate it. Looks like we're incurring costs for handling materials, but we can't really trace all that. We got engineering costs. So somebody took the total 20 plus 130 plus 80 plus 50, $280,000 of overhead cost, split it into 4 different pools. And then they said, well, what drives that cost up? This machine setup's driven up by the number of setups. The more a product line has to have setups, the more of that cost it should get. Inspection cost is driven by the number of inspections. The more we have to inspect this product line, the more it should get. Material handling is driven by the number of materials we have to move. The more we have to move for this product line, the more it should get. Engineering and so forth. So we got 4 pools, 4 drivers. We need 4 rates. Those rates are always going to be the total in the pool divided by the total of whatever the driver is. They've given it to us, so we'll just divide each of these and get rates for each of these. So 20,000 divided by 200, 100% up. $130,000 divided by 6,500, $20 per inspection. $80,000 divided by 8,000, $10 per material move. And then 50,000 divided by 1,000 is 50. Per engineering hour. So, if we're costing jobs here, if we're just costing these jobs by one big giant overhead pool divided by labor hours versus this whole setup here where we're actually thinking about what drives the cost and allocating overhead based on how many setups, how many inspections, how many moves, how many engineering hours, which do you think will be more accurate? Definitely the one that requires all this work, right? Now, if we had 2 product lines that weren't really that different from each other, this would be worthless, right? But if we have product lines or jobs that use different levels of each of these different things, then this is a useful thing and it'll give us a lot more accurate product costs, right? So it says, if the company uses activity-based costing, how much overhead cost goes to job 101? It depends on how many of each of these 4 things are being used on job 101. Setups, 1 of them, 100 apiece. So that gets $100 of overhead because of that 1 setup. 20 inspections, we said each inspection gets $20 of cost to go along with it. So 20 times 20. $400. Each material move gets $10 that goes along with it. There's 30 of them, $300. Each engineering hour gets $50. So 500. So that's how we get the overhead in there. 1,300 of overhead goes there. The alternative to that would have been just all of this added together divided by total labor hours. Wouldn't have been as accurate, right? And then we could do job 102 and 103, but I think you get the picture, right? Job 102. I don't have the answers because I haven't done these, so I need to just leave them. Setups. 200 inspections, 200 material moves, 100 so 25 and 6, 3,000 total to the job itself. Said compute the cost of each unit. You gotta pay attention to what they say. 50 units in there. So 60 for overhead. Materials. Should have added these all up and then done this. Direct labor. And then overhead. So 340 total cost. So this one wanted overhead cost total. This wanted cost of each unit. Total cost of each unit. Yeah, I should have added material, labor, and overhead all together and then divided, but I went down the path and kept going. And then for 103, they want us to do the cost of it and then cost plus it and figure out the price of each unit. All right, well, let's do it. I hate to leave it undone. 4 setups at 100 per setup is 400. Looks like a 9. That looks like a 9. 30 times 20 is 600. 50 times 10 is 500. And 50 times 10 is 500. 2,000. So we got 8,000 of materials, 4,000 of labor, and 2,000 of overhead. So 842. $14,000 total in the job. there are 200 units there. That is a $70 cost per unit. We're pricing it at cost plus 40%, so multiply it by itself and another 40%, $98. All right. So there you go. They're easy enough. They get a little long, as you can see, but they're not that difficult. There's so many different ways they can ask you to compute an activity-based question. So as long as you realize, though, different overhead cost pools, associated driver, they'll usually associate the driver for you. Take the total in the pool by the total of whatever the driver is, get rates for each driver, apply based on what's actually used. It's really easy, actually. But they didn't make us do any calculations, really. They just gave us a bunch of conceptual stuff. And Becker, I think, evidently agrees that it's more conceptual and less calculation, but I don't know. I'm not comfortable with that. So, you know, it's such a big topic that we cover so thoroughly in all our classes. I just find it hard to believe that you wouldn't see one. I may be wrong. But here's the conceptual ones they're kind of throwing at us. So this company uses ABC approach for cost allocation and product costing. They've got printing, cutting, and binding, everything, blah, blah, blah. Which of the following are characteristic of activity-based costing approach? So that little backstory is really didn't mean anything. So it basically comes down to which of these three things is true for activity-based costing. One says cost drivers are used as a basis for cost allocation. Of course, right? Pretty dumb. 2 says costs are accumulated by department or function for the purposes of product costing. That's not true. You know, that would be a departmental rate, right? So most of your textbooks will teach you just traditional costing with one rate for the whole plant. They might have a little side note to where you got a department 1 and a department 2 that does each of their own rates. So that's not activity-based costing. That's just a departmental rate. So that's a no on that one. This is activities that do not add value to the product are identified and reduced to the extent possible. So that's kind of talking activity-based management there, which does go and should go hand in hand with activity-based costing because you've done a lot of work already, and vice versa. You know, they just kind of go together. So should be 1 and 3, which is C. Number 2 says that there are cost allocation and product costing procedures follow activity-based costing principles. Activities have been identified and classified as being value or non-value adding. Which of the following activities is non-value adding? This isn't even an activity-based question, but it goes kind of hand in hand. So which of these, from the customer's point of view, is something the customer is not really going to care the extent to which this is done? Will they be interested in how the product is designed and engineered? Of course. Will they be interested in whether that product is heat treated? Evidently, that product does need to be heat treated, so I think they'll be interested in that being the case. Drill press, they take away that. Your product's not going to be doing what it's supposed to do. But what about raw material storage? They don't care how those materials are stored, where they came from, how long. That's something that's adding no value. So we need to reduce that to the extent possible, right? Another one, in activity-based costing, cost reduction is accomplished by identifying and eliminating all cost drivers. That's not possible, right? Non-value adding activities, definitely. 4 says, what is the normal effect on the numbers of cost pools and allocation basis when activity-based costing replaces traditional? I've seen this exact question a number of times, so it's kind of a classic. It's so stupid though. If you switch from traditional activity, you're going to have more of everything, right? So more cost pools, more allocation bases, in other words, more drivers, more rates. Stupid question, but for some reason it's a classic. Number 5, a manufacturing company has several product lines. Traditionally, it has allocated overhead between those product lines based on total machine hours, one rate. Under a new activity-based costing system, which of the following overhead costs would be most likely to have a new cost driver assigned to it? In other words, which of these is probably not driven by machine hours? And to get more accurate product costing, we would want to find a different driver. Electricity expense, machine hours would certainly drive that. Repair and maintenance, the more we run it, the more repairs. Employee benefits, no real relationship there, right? Not a good one. Depreciation expense, yeah, the more we use it, the more we use up the usefulness of our machines. Okay, 6, company would most benefit from ABC as opposed to traditional under which of the following conditions? A says this would be good if indirect costs are a high percentage of total costs. And that sounds logical, right? I mean, if we don't have a whole lot of overhead costs, then what's the point in going through this very costly system of allocating them if it's kind of an insignificant total? So possibly, we'll hang on to that one as our good answer if nothing else is better. B says when each department within the company has a single activity. No, you need a basic and a deluxe for activity to work, right? Kind of the way we've simplified that. If there's a single thing going on, there's no point in figuring out different drivers to go to different things. There's no different activities to deal with. C says when different products use the different activities of the department in the same proportions. No point in doing activity-based costing if each product uses the same number of material moves, the same number of setups, the same number of machine hours, whatever. Activity-based would be useless. And then D says when costs are immaterial. So A is the best one. It doesn't jump out at you immediately as, hey, that's definitely right. But after seeing the others, this one's kind of vague, but easy to land on an answer. Each of the following should be considered in the selection of an appropriate cost driver for the activity-based costing system, except what? A says volume-based production. D says behavioral effects. We always want to consider behavioral effects. Cost of measurement, we definitely want to consider the cost of measuring something. We always want to apply that cost-benefit analysis to anything we do. And then D says degree of correlation, which is kind of a fancier way of saying we have a driver that there's a cause and effect. That's what correlation is, right? So I'm not real sure what they mean by A, but I know that's the answer. So, kind of a weird lyrical question. Okay.
What question like that, Bill?
No, not something that doesn't make sense for sure. I mean, it may make sense if I sit there and think about it, but I don't know what they mean with A, volume-based production.
I didn't know what happened in terms of men in regards to accounting.
Yeah. I just kind of said, well, obviously we would want to consider behavioral effects. That's always a qualitative factor that's important. You know, we don't deal with it with our number crunching usually, but it's always you know, like the make or buy decision, it might make numerical sense to outsource, but do you want to lay off a bunch of your workers to do that? Because that's a problem, right? You would definitely want to consider that. There's always qualitative factors beyond the quantitative. We just always tend to focus on quantitative in our classes. All right, good old budgeting. You've seen it in principles too. You've seen it in cost. It's not that difficult. Definition things to kind of get reintroduced to, I suppose, things you should definitely know. A master budget is going to be, kind of think of it like a big old 3-ring binder with every other budget stuck in it, right? It's the whole plan for all the whole activities of the company. Within it, they say you've got an operating budget, a financial budget, and a capital expenditures budget. Most books will just say operating and financial. You'll stick the capital expenditures one in the financial budget. So that those three, knowing those three is not that important, but the operating budget, that's where a big chunk of your test questions come from. Operating budgets are the budgeted income statement and everything leading up to it. However, your book stuck the budgeted income statement somewhere else. So there's a lot of inconsistencies across different texts, which stinks. But you're fine thinking of it as operating budget, everything leading up to the budgeted income statement. So it's essentially every line item on the income statement has kind of a budget with it. You've got the sales budget that predicts your sales. You've got all the components of cost of goods sold. Once you have an idea of how many you're going to produce, you got to get a production budget. You got a materials budget. Then you got a labor budget. Then you got an overhead budget. Then you got a selling and administrative expense budget. Your test questions tend to come from these right here. Sales budget, production budget, materials budget. In my experience, that's where you get most of your test questions, as well as jumping down into the financial budgets, cash flow. That tends to be the hot spots right there. Something that's really important to take note of, if you already know, is that the budgeting process, your sales budget, everything flows from there. If you had a budget in an Excel spreadsheet and it was all formulas, if you change that sales number, it would flow through and affect everything on it, right? The sales budget number is very, very important. And it's done first. So you tend to see questions about that one way or the other. What's the most important step? What's the starting point? That kind of thing. So sales budget is the starting point. And it's, if you got a number crunching question on that, you'd love it, because all it is number of units you expect to sell times how much you expect to sell it for. Simple. You probably won't get so lucky as to have that question. Production budget. So that's how many units you need to produce, your manufacturing firm. I mean, you have to produce to not only meet sales, but also to have a certain level of inventory on hand. You don't want to have sales demands that you can't meet. So you always have this cushion of inventory, right? So your production budget is going to be unit sales, which comes directly from the sales budget, plus what's your target ending inventory, the problem will give you some idea of how to calculate that. You can't just do unit sales plus targeting inventory. You really are capturing what kind of change in inventory do I need to consider. So subtract out what you already have. Otherwise, you just keep adding and adding inventory each time, right? So unit sales plus whatever change in inventory level you need to meet whatever sales you expect is coming up later, right? That's your production budget. You've done it a bunch of times, so it's nice and easy. But what they really like to do is ask you a question about the materials budget. And the important thing to remember that people tend to forget is you need your production budget to do your materials budget, right? Your production budget is how many you have to produce to meet these sales. Your materials budget is how many materials you need to meet production. You're not getting materials to meet sales, you're getting materials to meet production needs, right? Units produced times whatever the material is that you're dealing with. It might be something like 1,000 units times 5 pounds of whatever this material is per unit. So you're kind of converting that to a material. Right? And then from there, all you're doing is the same thing you did up here, plus targeting the inventory of materials minus beginning. You need a cushion of heating inventory on hand for materials too. So that would be your materials purchased. You've done these a bunch in our classes, undergraduate. If you see a labor budget question or an overhead budget question, those are always easy. It's all things like, we produced 1,000 units. Variable overhead was $2 per unit. Fixed overhead was $50,000. What's your overhead? It just becomes a question of knowing how variable and fixed overhead or variable and fixed costs behave, right? Labor budget would be your workers work 1,000 hours, $10 an hour. Your salaried workers work 50,000. You know, it's just variable and fixed costs. If they're asking you a budget question on any of those others. So they like sales, production, and materials. You got to work through those. And they also like the cash budget. And those questions, really all these, really become an exercise of just following directions. It's like, listen to what they're saying and do the work. You know, with the cash budget, they'll say, cash sales was $10,000. Credit sales was $100,000. We expect to collect 70% of that this month, 30% of it next month. And you just schedule it out. It's really quite easy. So they do like to throw a cash budget question in every now and then, but it's just read the question and apply your knowledge. There's nothing to learn there. It's kind of easy, right? And then there's just some definitions about types of budgets here that you never know could show up. Up there for you to look at. So let's see. All right, production budget. The production budget question. What is the required production level given the following? So that just requires us to know, this is a little overly simple, but it's okay. We know our production budget is unit sales plus target ending inventory minus beginning inventory. Very important to know that. This one is really extremely easy, but that's okay. Projected sales, budgeted sales is another way to say that, of course. 1,000 units. Desired ending inventory, they want 100 units. Beginning inventory, 85. Prior year beginning inventory at the beginning of last year. I guess that's what they're trying to fool us with. That's neither here nor there. Beginning inventory this year is 85. So we want 1,000 units being sold. We want to produce enough to meet that. we want to have enough produced to have 100 units on hand, but we already got 85 from the beginning, so we just need to bump up our inventory by another 15 to meet our ending inventory limits, right? So all in all, we need 1,050 units. So they want to know what, so like I said, all these questions and some of these others, just really becomes an exercise of following their directions, applying what you know about how things work in accounting, and just answering the question, right? So it says their budget committee is preparing its master budget on the basis of the following projections. They are projecting 2.8 million of sales. They're projecting inventories to decrease by 70,000. They're expecting payables to decrease by 150,000. They think gross margin will be 40%. How much do they expect estimated cash disbursements to be? All right, now, let me say this. I do like this question because it's kind of neat and kind of fun. It could be a CPA question, but it's one of those kind of out there that I've seen similar type things, so it certainly could be. But yeah, this one's a little complex. So what do we know? We know that we need to figure out what they had to pay for inventories. And they have given us how much inventory is decreased by, and they've given us how much accounts payables decreased by. And they told us, well, let's see how it all ties together.
I'm sure it does.
It does. So here's what I immediately know. I know that sales is $2.8 million. I know that we subtract cost of goods sold to get gross margin, also known as gross profit, and they tell me that gross margin is 40% of sales, which means cost of goods sold is the other 60% of sales. Right, so we can figure all that stuff out. So for cost of goods sold is 1,680,000. Gross margin is 1,120,000. Now, again, this is out there, more complex than typical. So don't get freaked out about this. And I do like it because it's kind of like a puzzle in a way. So we know cost of goods sold now, right? What is cost of goods sold? That is us decreasing our inventory off the books, right? Inventory is credited, cost of goods sold is debited. That's what we do, right? So we're getting a little bit of idea of what's going on with our inventory account with this. We make up some random beginning inventory number. I just went with 70,000 because it says inventory is decreased by 70. So I just said, all right, I'm starting with 70 and I'm ending with 0, just so I can play with some numbers. So I'm making these up. This is just the way I do it. So I know that 1,680,000 was credited out of there to arrive to this. So now I can figure out what my purchases were of inventory, right? I'm plugging that in. So that means purchases 1,610,000 in this little example I'm drawing up for myself. All right. So now I can come over here to answer the question, and that's all based on accounts payable that we're paying cash for. Accounts payable decreased by 150. I just kind of set that as my beginning balance. Set 0 as my ending balance. All right. As I purchase inventory, I debit inventory. I'm over here pointing at the screen like you can see. I debit inventory. I credit accounts payable. All right. So if it went from a beginning of 150 down to 0, I can plug this debit here. To get an idea of how much of that I paid off. Yeah. How much do you need to worry about this problem? Not at all. The odds of you seeing something exactly like this is very, very slim. And pretty complex and a little problem to work through, but you never know what they'll throw at you. So the more of these types of things you can practice on reasoning through, the better. Right? You may not see anything like this ever again, but you reason through a really weird setup problem and you got there. So that's worth something, right? So I do like this problem, but is it useful for us? Not really. Forecasting. Important topics here. Maybe more so for the CMA exam than this, but also for CPA exam. So how do we forecast some things that end up on our budgets is the idea here. And a lot of times we'll use probabilities and expected values and things like that. The important content here is really begins here. But your correlation analysis, a little more important for CMA exam, but maybe some CPA questions too. And we know what correlation is, and regression and everything, but it's the strength of the relationship between variables, right? Dependent variables and independent variables. We've talked about that quite a bit. What we may not have talked about yet, though, is the correlation coefficient, which can be a range from -1 to 1, and how to interpret that. We may have, but I don't think we have. So, when you do your correlation analysis and you get your output, it'll range from -1 to 1. And that's denoted as R. -1 would be perfect negative correlation. One variable goes up, the other one goes down in an equal way. +1 will be a perfect positive correlation. If one goes up, the other goes up in the same way. 0 would be absolutely no correlation. So, between 0 and 1, you've got a positive correlation, but it's not perfectly positive, right? As one goes up, the other goes up less, but still goes up with it, right? R squared, which is called the coefficient of determination. That measures how good, it's goodness of fit. You got an equation that supposedly tells how one affects the other, how they're correlated. R squared tells you how strong that equation is for measuring what you expect to measure, right? It measures, it's like, okay, I'm seeing that the independent variable predicts the dependent variable in this way. R squared tells you how good your equation is at predicting that. And higher R squared is better. So in our academic research papers, we'll crunch all these fancy statistics, and that R squared becomes a really important number. We've got an equation, we've got our variables, we'll look at the statistical significance of each of those variables, and we'll look at the R squared of our equation to see how strong that is. So that becomes a really important thing. So R squared is goodness of fit. And then there's some calculations on probabilities and things that are kind of fun to do, and you can often see questions on those as well. I like this question. This is a good question. Like I said, this is something you more likely to see on a CMA exam, but very well could see it on a CPA exam. They're fun to do. So under frost-free conditions, this company expects a strawberry crop to have a $60,000 market value. An unprotected crop subject to frost has an expected market value of $40,000. If Cal protects the strawberries against frost, then the market value of the crop is still expected to be $60,000 under frost-free conditions, and $90,000 if there is a frost. All right, a lot of information here. What must the probability of a frost for Cal? What must be the probability of frost for Cal to be indifferent to spending $10,000 for frost protection? All right, a lot of numbers, kind of a complex situation, but reading that, you can see how this could be useful in real life, right? It's like, okay, I have an opportunity to protect my crop against this insurance. Is it worth it? What do I think is going to happen? What's it worth if it does? Blah, blah, blah. So let's see. So the question is, what must the probability of a frost be for them to be indifferent to spending $10,000 for frost protection? So protecting the crops if frost happens would be worth $50,000, right? Right, 90,000 protected minus 40,000 unprotected. That's what it's worth if they protect the crop if frost happens. That's what they get out of that, right? Now you have to pay $10,000 for this thing that won't necessarily happen, right? There was let's say there was a 100% chance of frost happening. This would absolutely be worth $50,000, right? 50,000 times 100% chance that it would happen, right? If there was a 50-50 chance, this would be worth $25,000, right? 50,000 times 25%. I'm sorry, 50%. So that reasoning, taking that similar reasoning, what are they willing to pay $10,000 for? What percent chance of this happening would make this worth $10,000, right? So 50,000 is what they stand to gain. They would be willing to pay $10,000 for that if there was a 20% chance that this would happen. That's what would make that worth $10,000. So there you go. Makes sense. So we are trying to decide what it's worth for us to protect the crops, right? So it says if there's a frost, it's worth $90,000. If we protect it, right? If there's not a frost, if there's a frost and it's unprotected, there we go. It would be 40,000 is what we can get out of it. So we stand to gain 50,000 by protecting. So that's the whole idea. So 40,000 if we say, who cares, let's roll the dice. 90,000 if we say, yeah, let's protect this thing in the fall. So it all comes down to how certain do we think the frost is going to happen. So, if we're 100% sure, then that would be worth 50,000 to us to protect it. If we're 50-50, we would be willing to pay 25,000 for it. What are we willing to pay 10,000 for? A 20% chance. And how do we figure out that chance? I guess we have to rely on the weather folks on that. But yeah. Number 2 is just the definition. Good, because we only have 11 minutes left. Using regression analysis, which measure indicates the extent to which a change in the IV explains the change in the DV. The extent to which it all explains everything is R squared, right? So 2 is number 3. We've done these before in other sections. It's just the whole equation saying which is what. So here they're asking which of the following is correct. A is the total fixed cost, so I think we're all very comfortable with that, right? Well, if you see that on a test, rewrite it as y equals mx plus b, and go from there. Because I'm the same way. Well, that's what I'm saying. Why change what was? Because that's exactly how I learned it. So yeah, I rewrite it as that and just go from there. Same again. Which of these is the independent variable? We've done this from other sections. So number 4, the independent variable is. So yeah, y equals mx plus b. So yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, they would change things.
They want to make it as extremely confusing as possible.
I just hate when it's not this plus this, where it's A plus instead of
I know.
this plus.
It's just better to rewrite it.
Yeah.
It really is. This one is interesting. The regression analysis results for ABC Company are shown as y equals 90x plus 45. So you rewrite that however you want. The standard error is 30. You don't even know what that is or care. And the coefficient of determination, R squared, is 0.81. The budget calls for production of 100 units. What is their estimate of the total cost? So they gave us a whole bunch of junk we don't need. All we have to do is plug into that formula. So don't let too much information screw with your head. Sometimes they're just that easy. And remember, this one, just another definition. Coefficient of determination, another way of saying that is goodness of fit. And that's important terminology to know. It's very commonly used. The whole idea of goodness of fit. All right. So that wraps up the rest of that. Fairly easy stuff to end. All right. Enterprise risk management. So there's about, you're going to find that I don't have much in the way of notes on this, which I guess is a good thing. Things I highlighted are kind of consistent among the other test preps. So let's see what we got. I don't like this kind of thing either. I don't like having to deal with this kind of thing in my own job. We're doing accreditation stuff, and we have to sit in front of accreditation committees and answer questions like, how do you feel that this specific thing aligns with your vision? And I'm not good at answering questions like that because I don't think about it that way. I just look at something, I don't think, hey, this will be a good thing, and I do it. I don't think, and I'm not good at doing that, and I'm not good at talking about it. So I'll hope that someone else answers that question instead of me when the committee asks it. And then I find that whoever does didn't really have a better way of saying it either. But they ramble through it better than I could have done, certainly.
I don't understand the purpose behind having all of that a lot. I guess it's not like, okay, yeah, it's good to have company value, company mission statement, and all that. But is it really necessary to tie everything back into it? I mean, I guess, but why?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's important for a lot of reasons, but I'm with you.
I guess I understand what you're saying. I was thinking something good, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
I don't really worry about how it necessarily
Right.
pertains to X, Y, Z part of it.
Right. But does everybody?
You have to look at it in a political way.
Does everybody think correctly about things like you and I do?
No problem.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
You have to look at it in political way,
Yeah.
they have to look at it,
Right.
evaluate it.
You need this in writing. You need this structure that needs to guide everything. It needs to be all thought through and formulated instead of just haphazardly everybody doing what they think is a good idea.
I think I've just dealt with it so many years for the ambassadors that I'm like, yeah.
So, theoretically, everything I do, I should be like, how does this fit into the College of Business's strategic plan?
When it comes to syllabus.
Yeah, and we
That's
have to
why I
tie all
think
our
it's
syllabi.
best to do it.
We have to formulate learning goals that tie into the strategic plan and all of that. And, the College of Business has a mission, a vision statement, and strategic goals. They're all part of the strategic plan. I'm not good at. I'm glad other people are good at putting that kind of thing.
So you have to work on planning all that out.
Yes, yeah, we have to do all this and we have to map everything out. And, when it's all over and done with, it's a very good thing. I really hate it. I really don't like it.
I think mostly what I hate is the wording of it. I would just rather it be simple,
Yeah.
easier to understand and comprehend.
Yeah.
Or vague or just big words that remove a lot of times with that kind of stuff.
But, I've been placed in charge of making the accounting department do what it needs to do. And, the other chairs are in charge of doing what their department needs to do. And, we can't just all go off and do our own thing. We need to be able to tie it all into some broader thing that's there. But that, again, it goes back to in my mind, I know the things I'm doing does tie back somehow to some of that. I just, you know what I'm saying? I just am not good at it.
Let me know if you need help, that's fine with me.
You like it. Okay.
Yeah.
You and I are going, I'm glad you said that because I've
Because I've
got,
had to go through the goals and all that stuff 3 times by now.
I've got to rewrite some of the undergrad goals and I need to reformulate a MAC goal too. So you're going to be working in the dean's office.
I am.
All right.
You
and I are gonna collaborate.
Get approved.
I'm excited about that. That's good. Okay, enterprise risk management, ERM, they'll often write it. It's very broad, very broad. It's the culture of the company, of the firm, or whatever. It is their capabilities. It is their practices. It's all of these things by which they manage risks to ultimately create value and then preserve value once it's there, that kind of thing. Realize value. So, culture It's their core values. It's how everybody in the group, all the department chairs, all the faculty, how do they collectively think as a group within their organization? We all need to be on the same page. Control environment would certainly, that would be a parallel for sure. Yep, yep. Yes, that culture, absolutely. So it's the culture, it's the capabilities, right? What is their competitive advantage? What are they good at? What makes them stick out? And then the practices that, so, it includes a bunch of things. Creating an appropriate culture, identifying risk, managing risk, a lot broader than internal control. It considers all these things like risk appetite, which kind of drives people crazy, trying to learn about, and considers their strategies and things like that. All right, risk, we know what it is, but can we put it into words? And maybe it's an uncertain event that will have some kind of impact on whether we can achieve our goals. And then they go so far as to drill down into a negative versus a positive risk, which I don't find to be that important, but I thought it was kind of interesting. A negative risk is a bad thing, a failure, a setback. Your system doesn't work, can't keep track of sales, can't keep track of inventory, something like that. Positive risk is an opportunity. Servers fail because demand for your product is so high. I thought that was not that important, but kind of interesting.
Like 2 years ago, when they released iPhone 5 and 6, they have these, their server died, like after like a few minutes after they opened the sale.
Yeah.
There's so many people just totally the same.
Yeah. So it's like, there's a risk that this happens, but if it does, we're going to be happy.
Right.
We'll fix it and be so much happy. Yeah, exactly. So a well-designed ERM system would provide us with reasonable expectation, not a guarantee, always important, of achieving goals. An important thing that pops up a lot is, in a lot of aspects of a lot of things, is integrated is always a good thing instead of isolated. So, these initiatives, the more they're integrated throughout the organization, the better than if they're just isolated. If we had accounting department initiatives that were our own thing without any regard to the overall College of Business, and then the finance department was doing something, that, this wouldn't be as effective as we actually do things, right? So, with ERM practices, very broad things, we want some expectation that we can achieve our objectives. There's risks involved. We need to manage those. We need to manage the amount of risk that we're willing to accept while pursuing the ultimate goal of creating value, right? And as we know, risk is directly related to our expected return. Theoretically, the more risk we assume, the higher our return should be. So part of this whole system is us figuring out how much risk we're willing to accept. What is our risk appetite? So risk appetite is a definition that we want to be aware of for sure. And it's simply the type of risk and the amount of risk that we're willing to accept in pursuing the value, right? It's our willingness to assume risk. It's a range, right? It's kind of a broad range, and it helps guide us on what to pursue and what not to pursue. Right? And it varies between products and varies between business units and varies over time. It needs to be flexible and it can adapt to different changes and things like that. It's just a very broad idea. What is the company's risk appetite? We were talking mission and vision and all that. It's always fuzzy. What's the difference between a mission and a vision? It's very much the same. But, mission is kind of why. Why do we exist, and what are we trying to accomplish? It's an objective. It's a why. A vision is what do we aspire to achieve over time. It's more of a strategy. It's more of a what. Again, I don't feel like these are super important for CPA type questions, maybe, but it's good to reason through it and think about it.
We've got a few more sections.
I didn't find any good questions from any of these. Okay. Okay, that's fine. So what's important? Definitely reasonable expectation, not a guarantee. That's always important. What is the definition? That's definitely important. Idea of an integrated system is always a good thing. Anything I have listed, I feel like is important enough to list. Anything I highlight in green, I feel like you better know this. Kind of what I do. Yeah. All right. So moving on. Yeah, the questions were real easy for this section. Just because I'm skipping them doesn't mean they weren't good. It just means, those were too easy, right? There's a really easy question about mission and vision and values. There's one that emphasizes that we want greater integration in our ERM system. It's really easy stuff. Not bad things, just kind of easy. Okay, I didn't take many notes on this one. There are 5 components in COSO's ERM framework. I wouldn't say this is as important as those other 5, but I would probably take note of them. For sure, they're kind of a lot of the same things as the 5 internal control ones that we did.
Do you have a way to remember these?
Just, a way to remember.
Let's see. Okay.
So information and communication and reporting all fall under one.
Yes. All right. I didn't create this. GoPro. I learned a new word. There's a backronym. Have y'all ever heard this term? So there's an acronym and a backronym. A backronym is like an acronym, except you take a word that already exists and make it into something. Like scuba is an acronym. That word was created by doing that. But a backronym is, let's see.
Like Wi-Fi.
Is that a backronym?
Wireless fidelity.
That's an acronym, isn't it? You created a new word.
Originally, it was just Wi-Fi. They just created the word. And then later, people added wireless fidelity to it.
Okay, didn't know that. Well, there you go. That is a backronym. Yeah. There you go. Has nothing to do with anything we're doing here, but it's okay. Fun fact.
I love it. I love
Fun facts.
learning stuff like that.
Now, how important is it to remember these 5? I don't know. It's up to you. I feel like if I was getting in to do the EC test, I'd probably take the internal control ones, memorize those, and forget these. That's probably what I would do. But Not saying that'd be the right thing to do. I'm just saying, I don't know if I can split up in my head each of the 5 and keep them straight. So I'll just stick with the first 5 and hope for the best on these, maybe. But they're kind of the same too. Governance and culture certainly ties into control environment from the other one. Same thing, different word for it. Information, communication, and reporting certainly ties into,
So would review and revision tie into risk?
Review and revision would be monitoring. Yeah. These would kind of be risk assessment and performance. Not performance.
Activity.
Yeah. Existing control. Yeah, the existing control activity. So yeah, they kind of tie in. But
Yeah. I have another acronym to remember, so it's easy for me to be straight.
Yeah.
But yeah, same old things. Governance and culture. That's the whole. On the top. Culture, values. Strategy and objective setting is strategies and objectives, risk appetite, kind of thing. Performance, all these things for all these. Yeah. Questions were not very useful for us to go through. So each of these sections drills into each of those things, governance and culture. There's no real new information here. The directors is the primary bulbs. We already mentioned all of this. Board independent of management. There's really nothing new here. Yeah. So I grabbed the one, according to the COSO ERM framework, which of the following is least likely to impede the independence of a board member? This one was kind of tough. This is one where it's like, well, you don't know what you don't know type thing. But yeah, we're looking for the best thing is what we're looking for. So the first one, says Jane was a partner at an accounting firm that conducted the organization's financial statement audit 5 years ago. There's no existing business or contractual relationship with the entity currently. We know that's fine. So we know that's the answer, right? The thing that bugged me was, we're like, well, what about that? But they do make a point that someone on the board that long would be a potential independence problem.
Yeah. If you have so many connections with people,
right?
They're just going to tell you what they want.
Yeah. That was one of those things I didn't really think about or know till I read this problem. Like, okay, well, now I know. Didn't know before, now I do. So, okay, there's some stuff here worth noting for sure. And it's not that difficult, really. We already mentioned risk appetite before. So that's kind of an overall decision of risk appetite that's made. And then you kind of go from there and assess your risk capacity and develop a whole risk profile. So risk capacity, very descriptive term, is the maximum amount of risk they can absorb. Risk appetite we've already defined, but here it is again. And then they make some points that could possibly show up in a conceptual type question. Your overall risk appetite obviously wouldn't be more than your risk capacity. That's kind of an upper limit is your risk capacity, right? So nothing should be more than that. And you can state this using numbers, or you can state it using words. Risk appetite, that is. There's some question, I don't know if it was here or somewhere else, that talked about a goal of decreasing risk appetite. That's not a goal. It sounds like it might be a goal. It's like, we need to try to figure out a way to decrease our risk appetite. But no, that's something that you're just, all right, what's our risk appetite here? You know, you don't have a goal to decrease that.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
So risk capacity, risk appetite.
Uh-huh.
Same thing. You know? I mean, risk appetite is.
The words you mean?
I mean, it's the maximum that they're willing to accept, and risk capacity is the maximum they can absorb. Kind of like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
It's
see what
close,
you're
it's not the
saying.
same.
It's hard to keep them straight.
I mean, in the question, I think there was a question about this to know it's really.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say.
I kind of think of it as like diminishing level of return. Like how something, you want something, but then once you have so much of it, then like your appetite, that's like the diminishing level. I don't know.
I don't know. I think of like the word appetite. I'm like, you know, I have a pretty good appetite for sushi, and I can eat a big old platter of sushi.
And that's maximum that we're going to.
No, a big old platter is not a maximum.
Yeah.
That's just my appetite. I'm like, hey, pile it on. I can do it. Now, I could say, you know what?
But the maximum can be
30 pieces is my capacity. I can't, you know.
It's kind of like think about work. You can potentially work 24 hours a day. You don't not want to work. That was stupid. I apologize. But I regret it. But let's say you can work 12 hours a day. You don't want to work 8.
Yeah.
So you have the capacity to work 12 hours.
Yeah.
But you don't really want to. So your appetite would be 8. Similar to what he said.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, my appetite's, you know, maybe, and it'd probably be a range, like, okay, my appetite's, you know, 6 to 12 hours or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say no number.
But
But my capacity might be 15 hours, but after 15, I'm going to be dead on my feet and I can't work, you know. But yeah, it is a little fuzzy. So I pulled these examples in. Again, I forget where I pulled these in. It may have been our very actual book. I may have pulled it somewhere else. But, you know, a medical supply company might have a low risk appetite regarding safety and compliance. They're not willing to accept a whole lot of risk regarding safety and compliance. They might have a higher risk appetite for strategic and operations objectives. They're willing to take more risk there. They have a bigger appetite. You know, they're speaking broadly, you know, strategizing and stuff like, well, what's your appetite regarding safety? Oh, low. Yeah. What's your capacity? 0. You know, so, but you know, university might want to expand offerings and might have a moderate risk appetite related to that. They will not accept programs that present a risk to the mission and vision. That would be their risk ceiling or capacity. Technology company might want to invest at least 25% of its budget in innovation, technology innovation. That would be their risk floor. So, you know, there you go. Risk tolerance. And this gets a little too much, really. The risk tolerance would be the boundaries of acceptable variation in which they can perform related business objectives. So this is more focused and related to implementing strategy and variation for plans stuff. And this would be stated in numbers instead of the broad, I got a high risk appetite, you know, this is more something like this. So example of risk tolerance would be, I have a target time of 40 minutes. My tolerance is somewhere between 30 to 50. You know, just put examples there, but it's just terminology. You know, you go through all this craziness and then you look at your questions and they gave us 3. None of which I made a note of. They were all very vague.